Well, hey, welcome back to the hydroplate controversy, the Walt Brown controversy. We have we've made a video of what Walt Brown wrote in his 9th edition pre-book PDF, and also we did the him setting the record straight, the email or the letters that were sent back between him and back and forth. We did some correspondence on that, and today we're going to take a look at the timeline of what happened when. And to get to that timeline, it's a little tricky. I'll just add my screen to the stage and put me down here, and I'll go up. So when you go into, what you're going to do is go into YouTube, and then you're going to go to the Hydroplate Week of Celebration. Hydroplate Week of Celebration. Go to that, and then the easiest way is just to search blackballed. Yeah, why was Walt Brown blackballed? Okay, search that, and you're going to get this one, and you can video. Yeah, he was blackballed. And so let's see here. Go into the write-up. Let's see more of this, and it says you can find it on hydroplate or hydroplate.org, but I couldn't. So you'll have to just, in this write-up, click this link, and then you're going to get the hydroplate timeline. The Grand Canyon controversy, a chronology of key events. And we can get rid of this. Okay, here we go. This was put together by Jane Albright, and what a lot of research she did for that. Jane Albright and Pastor Lee. Okay, the Grand Canyon controversy, a chronology of key events, date 1986. Dr. Ed Holroyd gave Dr. Steve Austin a sketch of a single lake near the Grand Canyon. Holroyd was trying to explain the absence of rock debris at the base of cliffs. This led him to postulate one huge lake at 5,577 feet, situated east of the Kaibab Plateau, elevation over 8,000 feet. 1986 to 1987. Dr. Walt Brown spent an entire year physically exploring and researching the Grand Canyon and making several discoveries that revealed how Grand Lake breached at Marble Canyon and then carved the Grand Canyon. To this day, only Brown's discoveries and theories solve these mysteries. 1988. Brown begins presenting his breach dam explanation in lectures and radio interviews, broadcast over 200 stations on September 16th, 1988. ICR publishes 1988 version of Austin's Grand Canyon Field Guide. In it, Austin muses about the possibility that a torrent of water carved the canyon. He also mentions several problems must be overcome by any explanation, but proposes no solutions, answers, or evidence. Brown obtains a copy of Austin's 1988 Grand Canyon Field Guide. 1989. Austin produced a revised field guide in 1989 with a 1988 copyright. This version modified the prior 1988 edition to make room for Austin to insert Holroyd's 1986 sketch showing a single lake near the Grand Canyon. The map caption states, "Ancient lake which breached its dam to form Grand Canyon," and uses an elevation of 5,700 feet, the same elevation as Brown's, instead of Holroyd's elevation of 5,577 feet, or 1,700 meters. Brown publishes the 1989 fifth edition of In the Beginning. In it, he publishes his two-lake breach dam theory with a detailed explanation, including how the two lakes formed after the global flood, sequence of events of the dam breach, the underlying mechanics, and the specific breach point. 1989. Austin purchased the 1989 edition of Brown's book, In the Beginning, only 1 month after it was published. Austin Personal Correspondence, August 29th, 1994. 1990. ICR/Austin published the 1990 edition of the Field Guide, in which the section with Holroyd's map was completely revised, along with Holroyd's map, page 68, still mistakenly showing just one lake. Austin also inserts Brown's map of Grand and Hopi lakes and the breach point, Marble Canyon, without attribution, page 76. So 1990 to 1993, beginning in 1990, and for 3 years, Brown receives calls from many people alleging that Austin claimed he, Brown, had plagiarized Austin's work on the Grand Canyon. Only when this falsehood threatened to have a large financial impact on a video production of another creationist, Dr. Robert Gentry, did Brown determine that he must act. In accordance with Matthew 18, Brown's first step was to resolve this controversy, was to contact Austin directly and privately by letter. June 21st, 1993, Austin responds to Brown. He denies that he had ever accused Brown of plagiarism. He attached a copy of the April 1989 version of his Grand Canyon Field Guide containing a 1988 copyright stamp, claiming that the content, which included his breach dam theory, was written in November of 1987, prior to Brown's publications on this subject. Austin concludes that this proves I am the first creationist to propose the breach dam theory for the origin of Grand Canyon. Brown compares the field guide Austin sent with his June 21st, 1993 letter, copyrighted 1988, which Austin states is identical in content with his 1988 version, and the 1988 version Brown already owned. Brown notes the following differences between the two versions. The 1989 version, page 54, now has a map, which was not in the prior 1988 version. This was the map that Holroyd gave Austin 3 years prior in 1986. Holroyd's map figure showed a single unnamed lake that encompassed both Grand Lake and Hopi Lakes. However, Austin changed the elevation of Holroyd's original map from 5,577 feet to 5,700 feet, the same elevation proposed by Brown. The map caption now includes the brief statement, ancient lake which breached its dam to form Grand Canyon. This is the only mention in this entire lengthy book of a breach dam explanation. Brown finds it inexplicable that there would be no other discussion of the theory anywhere else in the book had it been part of the original. For any lake to breach and carve the Grand Canyon, there must be explanation for how the water flowed vertically 2,000 feet to traverse the Kaibab Plateau, or how it penetrated this 30-mile wide dam of limestone, which is denser than concrete. The earlier text, in which Austin muses about the possibility that a torrent of water carved the canyon and mentions several problems must be overcome by any explanation, remains unchanged. Brown wonders, how did Austin's uncertainty in the preceding pages of the same guidebook, which does not even mention the lake, suddenly disappear on page 54? 4 paragraphs, references on page 55, had been deleted, ostensibly to make room for the map on page 54 without the need to renumber the pages. Also, the page number is crooked, evidence that this page had been manually doctored. Other references in the book were dated 1989. How could a book with a 1988 copyright include references to 1989 documents? The evidence seemed to suggest that Holroyd's map was inserted at the last minute when there was no time for other revisions before the 1989 version publication deadline. When Brown confronted Austin with the above, Austin said he accidentally put a title page with a 1988 copyright from the previous year's publication into the 1989 publication, after originally claiming the 1988 copyright gave Austin priority. 1993 to 94. Brown and ICR/Austin exchanged many letters over the next year. Despite the detailed evidence that Brown presented, Morris and Austin denied any wrongdoing and tried to sidestep the issue. Brown responded that since they could not reach agreement, they should both submit to binding arbitration with an independent, knowledgeable Christian arbitrator. For 6 weeks, Morris refused, finally agreeing only when Brown said he would no longer keep the matter private unless they did agree to arbitrate. Over the next 7 weeks, Morris/Austin proposed 2 arbitrators. Upon checking, Brown discovered that both proposed arbitrators had previous ties to ICR. Brown insisted that the arbitrator be independent of both organizations. Finally, ICR agreed to use a Christian arbitrator and mediation service in the Los Angeles area. Morris then sought legal advice and was told that he and Austin should not submit to binding arbitration. However, Morris and Austin did not tell Brown they were withdrawing their written agreement to arbitrate until 4 days before the scheduled Christian arbitration at Pepperdine University in Los Angeles. At that time, Austin and Morris announced that they would only mediate. Arbitration results in a binding decision where mediation seeks harmony and understanding. With airline reservations and preparations made, Brown was faced with a dilemma. Should he cancel everything or proceed with mediation? Brown knew that mediation would not force Morris and Austin to comply should the ruling go against them, reasoning that after a year of correspondence, something is better than nothing. Brown agreed to mediate. In hindsight, this decision was a major mistake. June 21st, 1994. A Christian mediation panel comprising 3 attorneys and 1 retired federal judge led by Peter Robinson, associate director and assistant professor of law at Pepperdine University, reviewed the facts of the debate between Brown and Austin on the issue and ruled in favor of Brown. Austin signed the agreement, which instructed him to insert an errata sheet into the unsold copies of his book, Grand Canyon, Monument to Catastrophe, 1994. In preparation for publishing this book, Austin changed the name of the lake from Grand Lake to Canyonlands Lake. Per the agreement, one of the corrections to be made was that Austin was to revert to using Grand Lake and give credit to Brown. Minutes before the mediation ended, Austin proposed that there be no errata sheet because, he said, the January 1994 edition was almost out of print and a new edition would soon be printed. Brown agreed only if Austin's book inventory was less than 1,000 copies. June 22nd, 1994. Since the mediation session was not recorded as Brown had requested, Brown wrote detailed notes of the meeting and produced a memorandum that he forwarded to all parties for review and comment/correction. No one responded. June to September 1994, Austin sends a barrage of documents to Robinson to persuade him to minimize the required correction to his soon-to-be published second edition of Grand Canyon, Monument to Catastrophe, and insisting that his book be allowed to continue using the name Canyonlands Lake instead of Grand Lake. September 21st, 1994. Robinson responded that Austin was to stop using the name Canyonlands Lake when referring to the Grand Lake explanation for the formation of Grand Canyon. Instead, Austin was directed to use Grand Lake, the name given by Brown, as a symbol of his commitment to reconcile with Brown and as one way to acknowledge Brown's contributions regarding this body of water. Also in this letter, Robinson proposed a joint statement that would be the press release groomed for public consumption. It was determined that at mediation that this statement would be agreed to and signed by both parties. This was never finalized because Austin continued to stall and barrage Robinson with more arguments. Austin now argues that Robinson does not have the authority to dictate the name of an extinct lake, Grand Lake. Austin also wants the joint statement to be changed to reflect that he thinks Brown plagiarized his work. November 14th, 1994. Tragically, after countless hours, Robinson caves in and retracts his determination that Austin must change the name back to Grand Lake and instead makes it a suggestion only. Robinson also rewords the joint statement to include that the mediation covered Austin's charge that Brown used Austin's written work without attribution. Since this was untrue, Brown did not sign it. Austin ignores Robinson's recommendation and now publishes a note, 62, in the second edition of his book, in which he makes misleading statements that are impossible to discern without having a deep understanding of the facts. He also reasons that his lake is better than Brown's and deserved a new name, Canyonlands Lake, because it was at a new 5,800-foot elevation. December 29, 1994, letters from Brown to Morris. Letter from Brown to Morris. Brown documents the ways in which Austin and ICR violated the mediation contract with Brown and how they otherwise continued to spread false and misleading information. Brown notified Morris that under these conditions, he, Brown, would no longer unilaterally hold himself to the contract that Brown and Morris had already broken. Let's read that again. Brown notified Morris that under these conditions, he, Brown, would no longer unilaterally hold himself to the contract that Austin and Morris had already broken. In this letter, Brown informed Morris and Austin that he was going to go public with the correspondence because of their failure to comply. January 12th, 1995. ICR/Morris II response, as I have often stated before, neither Steve nor any of our staff have ever plagiarized anything you have written or spoken, and we shall not do so in the future. Neither have any of us ever, to our knowledge, defamed you or demeaned your work, either in publications or in public settings, and we shall not do so in the future. Abundant documentation is available that shows this to be false. A new lie begins to circulate that Brown had threatened or did sue ICR, thus defaming Brown's character as a Christian. Over the years, this lie has been repeated by many creation ministry leaders, including Dr. John Whitcomb, Dr. John Baumgartner, formerly of ICR, Dr. Don DeYoung, president of the Creation Research Society, and Mr. Mark Louie, Chief Communication Officer for Answers in Genesis. So there is the time. 2001. Authoress Julia Muffinger Orzaco reviewed the documentation on this topic while researching her book, Christian Men of Science, 11 Men Who Changed the World, which includes biographies of both Henry Morris Sr. and Brown. On page 305, footnote 11 in her book, she writes, for over 100 years, geologists have known that if a large lake begins to erode a point on its rim, canyons can be carved in days. Another geologist, Austin, had similar ideas. He published Brown's data on the elevation, name, location, and breach point of Grand Lake without proper crediting, and then backdated his publication to a year before Brown's publication. This geologist also claimed that an even earlier obscure publication of his contained this explanation for the Grand Canyon. It does not contain this explanation. The claims of this geologist have caused confusion as to who first published the data and who set forth this explanation for the formation of Grand Canyon. Careful examination of the evidence indicates that Brown was the first. Creation and global flood apologist, former U.S. Navy nuclear engineer technician, and now pastor of Calvary Church of Port Orchard, Washington, Kevin Lee, becomes mystified by and curious about the mainstream creation organization's antagonism toward Brown's hydroplate theory and Brown personally. June 6th, 2006. Face-to-face meeting at ICR, then headquarters in California, between Pastor Kevin Lee, Calvary Church at Port Orchard, Washington, and Mark Rush of ICR. In that meeting, Pastor Lee requested that employees of ICR stop slandering and misrepresenting the work of Brown and gave examples where they had done so. Lee even offered to pay 3 days' salaries for any ICR scientists who would carefully read and critique Brown's work. Rach said payment was not necessary and that the suggestion that their scientists carefully read Brown's work was reasonable. June 15th, 2006, as Rashi's request, Lee sent him a summary of their June 6th discussion to discuss with ICR management. Rashi's ICR response to Lee included the following. Given the long history of disputes between ICR and Walt Brown and the mediation agreement between Walt and Brown, Henry Morris, and Steve Austin on June 21st, 1994, our leadership team has determined that it would be counterproductive to begin revisiting Walt Brown's theories, since we are already familiar with them. and potential for agreement is minimal. May 28th, 2007. Answers in Genesis opens the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky. The museum and AIG's Flood Geology DVD use the name Canyonlands Lake and other information that Austin had plagiarized from Brown. December 2007. In a face-to-face discussion between Whitcomb and Pastor Kevin Lee, Whitcomb indirectly disparages Brown, hinting at a moral problem. Pastor Lee calls Brown to ask about what happened. Brown sent Pastor Lee all related correspondence on this controversy. March 2008. Pastor Lee provided Austin, AIG, and ICR with documented proof of Austin's plagiarism and poor science in the AIG museum and requested a response to either correct his information or to correct the museum displays. He received no response that dealt with the facts. April 2008. Pastor Lee distributed a clarified version of the same letter to approximately 200 creation organizations so that they could be aware of the poor science AIG and ICR were promulgating, as well as the history behind it. This second letter generated several streams of correspondence between various parties. Pastor Lee revised the letter in July of 2009 to incorporate the additional insights gained from those who responded and to correct a minor error in the first two letters. July 2008. Austin inadvertently exposes his deception when he published an article in the July 2008 issue of ICR's Acts and Facts titled Red Rock Pass, Spillway of the Bonneville Flood. For example, in reference 8 of that article, Austin states, earlier in 1987, I used topographic data obtained from Dr. Holroyd to show that if Grand Canyon were blocked by a giant man-made dam with 5,700 feet elevation, the lake formed would rise behind the dam to a maximum of 5,620 feet elevation and would extend into 4 states. The overflow location of that lake is at 5,620 feet, should be 20 miles east of Kanab, Utah, at Telegraph Flat. So in 2008, Austin is back to 5,700 feet, Brown's elevation, when in 1994, he said in his book, footnote 62, that the reason his lake was better than Brown's and deserved a new name, Canyonlands Lake instead of Grand Lake, was because it was at the 5,800 foot elevation. While Austin's original use for years of Brown's 5,700 foot level for the elevation of Grand Lake instead of Holroyd's 5,577 feet elevation may seem trivial, it shows the origin of what Austin was using, that is, Brown's work, without attribution. Other statements in this article conflict with prior statements, documents further revealing Austin's deceptions. And that was when? In July of 2008. Okay. July of 2009, Pastor Lee sends letters to AIG, ICR, Austin, Whitmore, and Holroyd with copies of his narrative and conclusions to give them opportunity to correct any errors. August 2009, after receiving no fact-based response, Pastor Lee did post the documentation on the church's website, calvarypo.org, but deliberately made it difficult to find by the casual searcher, instead sending direct links to those who requested them. December 31st, 2017, Pastor Lee sends another letter to ICR as a final appeal for face-to-face meeting with Austin present to correct the wrongs they have committed but received no response. June 2018, Bob Enyart of Real Science Radio gained access to Austin's 1988 field guide and his obviously doctored and backdated 1989 guidebook by which he falsely claimed priority. On air during our RSR's Grand Canyon series, Enyart discussed the above account and many more details. You can hear that at rsr.org/GC4. Also at 17 minutes into RCR's flood video, you can see how ICR's founder, Henry Morris Sr., introduced Brown, and then at the end of his career, you can hear how Morris honored Brown. April 2019, Austin submitted for publications to Answers in Genesis a Grand Canyon paper that required priority with his evidence that at the ICR headquarters, he had posted in 1990, let's do that again. April of 2019, Austin submitted for publication to Answers in Genesis a Grand Canyon paper that claimed priority with his evidence that at the ICR headquarters, he had posted in 1987 on a bulletin board the map in question. If this were true, why did he not mention this at mediation? May of 2019. Update posted to kgov.com/ICR Steve Austin plagiarized Walt Brown, see proof of fraud. And there's dashes where the spaces should be. August 2019. In August 2019, a friend of both Austin and Brown tried to set up an arbitration to resolve the matter. Brown agreed. Austin refused. Now claiming an amazing coincidence that both he and Brown produced the Grand Lake explanation independently, name, location, and elevation. Today, the plagiarism, slander, and confusion. Wait, what is this? Let's see. This is page 6, bottom. What is today? What's the date of today? When is this written? Oh, it doesn't say. Okay. I think it was 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, 20. All right. Today, where are we at? Today, the plagiarism, slander, and confusion continue. The critical issue is not who gets credit for the name of a lake, as Brown acknowledges. Others before him had suspected that the Grand Canyon was formed catastrophically, but no one had been able to explain how or where, including Austin. The critical issue is that this sad state of affairs hinders others from learning about the only scientifically viable explanation for the formation of the Grand Canyon, which is a powerful apologetic tool in support of the global flood. Because with Brown's discovery that Grand Lake was separate from Hopi Lake and not connected as Holroyd had thought, key questions could finally be answered, including what uplifted the massive Colorado Plateau 6,200 feet above sea level? Had that not happened, the mile-deep Grand Canyon would not exist. Number 2, how did Grand Lake form? Number 3, how did both Grand Lake and Hopi Lake breach and flow over what is now the higher Kaibab Plateau? Number 4, where is the 800 cubic miles of dirt that was carved out of the Grand Canyon? Furthermore, with his insights about where to look, Brown was able to locate the breach point, which is clearly seen on the ground and from the air, a key piece of spectacular evidence. He also explained what produced multiple spectacular geological features that lie within a few hundred miles of the Grand Canyon. These and the underlying mechanisms that cause them are only understood in the context of Brown's hydroplate theory explanation of the flood of Noah, which AIG and ICR show no interest in understanding. Austin cannot explain any of these. He does not even address how the overflow from the lake could have traversed the much higher Kaibab Plateau. The Grand Canyon chapter of In the Beginning is a comprehensive presentation on the origin of the Grand Canyon, including a detailed explanation of the initial conditions and reason for them, the chronology of events and mechanisms and forces that created this incredible world wonder. His 44-page explanation is very popular, currently 4th in the Google hit out of 4.5 million. The confusion caused by Austin's failure to set the record straight continues, and AIG displays, videos, and DVDs are tarnished because of this dishonesty. It is time to set the record straight once and for all. How can we Christians effectively defend the biblical record and battle the evolutionist enemy if we cannot even function with truth and integrity within our own camp? Written by Jane Albright, and I think that was 2025. Okay, let's jump back to StreamYard. Let's remove this. And there we go. All right. So there we are. So there's the can of worms nobody wants to answer. And what can we do? Well, I suggest that you start asking about the hydroplate whenever you're around creation organizations or listening to creation speakers, and then ask them about their accurate predictions that their flood model presents. Yeah, and that's the catastrophic plate tectonics. And Walt Brown has written that, before you get published, you should be able to, you should have a list of predictions that your theory should that should be confirmed with your prediction. And if you don't make the prediction, that shows very little confidence in your theory. And again, just start asking people, what do you think of the hydroplate accurate predictions? What do you think of, the biblical support? Just start asking people, these experts, these creation experts, what biblical support do you have for your model that separates it from the other flood models? What accurate predictions have you made? And what are your current predictions that you expect to have confirmed? And I think if people start asking that more and more and more and start shining the spotlight on the hydroplate, then a theory that does make accurate predictions and is validated by NASA discoveries will hit the mainstream. And when it hits the mainstream, it'll destroy the Big Bang. And so we need all hands on deck for this. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope to put some more stuff out there. I'd love to see the correspondence between Walt and the other parties involved, and see the mental mental gymnastics that people do. All right. So here we go. Oh, and we have some comments here. Let's take a look at some of the comments. Here's one of them. Let's see. Why couldn't these men just have set aside their pride and worked together on these things? Exactly. Exactly. Why couldn't they? Because they couldn't, for whatever reason, they didn't want the creation movement has been hamstrung for decades. Can you imagine how much scientific clout we'd have as creationists if we would have been banging the hydroplate drum, which accurately predicts what's in a comet, what asteroids are made of, and NASA discoveries are validating it. And so, yeah, why couldn't these men just have set aside their pride? And Walt, he wanted to do that. Exactly. So that's a very good question. All right. And I think, yeah, we've got pretty much everything covered. And I encourage you to start asking about hydroplate, and to get this talk, to get the link that I was reading, I'll finish that up. You go into the hydroplate week of I better share my screen. I will share my screen. Okay. You go into, let's go over here. Okay, the week of hydroplate celebration. This is a YouTube channel. It might just be called hydroplate celebration in the future. We'll see. And then just search blackballed. That's what you do, because Walt Brown was blackballed. Why was that? And there's a talk, and you can hear Pastor Lee talk about his experience. And this is okay. And so you can hear him talk about it. But why I'm showing you this is to get this timeline. You go into the details, and it's supposed to be on hydroplate. We'll try and get that up there better. I couldn't find it, but that's the link that you click to get to what I just wrote you. And so we just want all the information to be brought out, and then it can be discussed, and when the healing can begin, and then science can advance. Let's remove this. Okay. Yeah. And basically that's what we're doing. We're not trying to throw mud or make people look bad. We're not going to tar and feather anybody, but we do want the truth to prevail. And this is a powerful, powerful witnessing tool. And was it Bill Wells? He talked about being a fighter jet pilot and how, he had confidence in his weapons, his offensive and defensive weapons. And he says this hydroplate theory is a excellent weapon that gives him confidence to stand toe to toe with the evolutionists. And we need to get that into the mainstream. And this isn't going to come from the top. I don't know what's happening up there. It doesn't make any sense to me. And none of this. It's got to be from the bottom up. People who want the truth need to start asking questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. And the big question is, what accurate predictions have you made? What are your current predictions? And what biblical support do you have that distinguishes your flood model from all the others? And why don't you allow us to think in your museum? To think, you need to see both sides. You need to see both sides of a situation to think. It's like that saying, beware of one hand clapping, because there's two sides to every story. If you only see one side over and over and over again, it's probably because the truth is being censored by those who can do it. And that's what we see with evolutionists in the government schools, museums, and media. They don't give people both sides. They just give people a blind chance perspective of the past. That's like thinking your computer got put together by blind chance. That'd be absurd. How much more absurd to think your bodies got put together by chance. But yet, if that's all people do, they just memorize. And as Christians, we should have a higher standard than that. If there's two theories out there that explain Grand Canyon, they should be both presented. And then you can think, you can see both sides and come to your own conclusion. When only one side's presented, you don't think, you just memorize. And as Christians, I think we should set the example. Set the example for the evolutionists. Yeah, we've got competing theories. Let's take a look at them. Let's people see both of them. That's what we're shooting for. And it'll be interesting to see which museum allows people to think first. Which museum is going to put both these flood models in there? You know, there's a Broken Bow, Nebraska. They got a museum. It's called the Boneyards Creation Museum, and they've got the hydroplate theory in there, but it's not compared to the creation of plate tectonics yet. Hopefully there's going to be a display there. These are the accurate predictions of HPT, and these are the accurate predictions of CPT, and apparently they don't make any. And these are the biblical support for HPT, and this is the biblical support for CPT. And then let people see, you know, if the Bibles are standard, you know, and if predictions are the currency of science. And so it's going to be interesting to see which of the big three is going to allow people to think. And that shouldn't be controversial. Allowing people to think is what we should be all about. Come, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Not come, let us memorize. You know, you force us to think what you propose so you can sell books or whatever the reason is behind it. You know, the longer I live, the less I understand. So anyhow, I better get off my soapbox, and thank you for sticking with us the whole time. We're going to try and get some more of the Walt Brown's letters, correspondence. We'll try and dig them up. And so then you can get all the information and think for yourself. And hopefully this can of worms can be dealt with, and then science can advance and start accepting a theory instead of blackballing it for whatever reason. So again, thank you, and may God bless your efforts in sharing the truth.